Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We'll look at this morning a text that we're all semi-familiar with. We're all familiar with the beginning of Torah, but I want us to take some time today to encounter Bereshit, to encounter these first words of Genesis as if we'd never heard them before. Okay? And I know it's hard, and I know I say that, a lot, that we need to look at this in a new way, but I really want us to look at it this morning as if we'd never heard these words before, because we come to our interpretation of that text through all of the stories we've heard, all of the struggles we've had with that text, all of the, is it literal, is it not? Does a day mean a day? Does it mean a millennium? We come to this text with all of the baggage that our Western scientific society has with this as being a description of creation. So I want us to just suspend for a little bit our attachment and understanding of this text. And I want us to look at it anew. And then we're going to look at a representation of actual creation. And then we're going to talk again. All right. So I'm not going to spend too long on the text right now. We're just going to point out one or two things, and then we're going to watch the television. So let's say our bracha for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, God, Spirit of the universe, who makes us holy with your mitzvot and commands us to engage with words of Torah. All right, so we're going to start Genesis 1:1. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Our first, if we're coming to this brand new, never having heard a translation before, we already have a problem translating. Because how do we translate Bereshit? What's B? In, the preposition in. B, what is Rosh?
Yeah.
Head, or Rosh Hashanah. We don't say the head of the year.
Beginning.
The beginning. So the head, the beginning, right? Head of the class. We know that in English too, that head means front, or first, or beginning. So we've got something about Rosh, something about first, something about beginnings. Now what is that tav doing there? What does that make Rosh, to put that tav at the end?
No idea.
All right. So this is one of the challenges in interpreting this word, translating this word, because that tav shouldn't be there. So that tav could be the conjunctive tav, which is Torat Moshe. HaTorah shel Moshe. The Torah of Moshe is Torat Moshe. Right? So that tav means the beginning is attached to something that comes after it. In the beginning of the Torah of Moshe. Torat Moshe. That tav, if it means of, means in the beginning of. Well, then what should come after that? Well, we're in the beginning of.
Creation.
So, right? So in the beginning of bara, he created. What kind of sense does that make? So how would you translate that?
In the beginning of God creating the heaven.
Okay. So you see, so this is the challenge, because that's in the past tense. But it could be in the beginning of when he created, right? But it's a tricky translation. Most of our scholars do not, which is fascinating to me, most of our scholars do not translate this as when God started creating. Nobody. Not even Rashi. Rashi, our most pshat guy. Rashi, who wants to be most accurate in the translation without any woo-woo stuff around it, just straight on translation, does not say when God started creating. There is nothing linear to most of our commentators about this statement, which is fascinating, because what's the charge against Genesis always? Well, the earth is so everyone who wants to unpack this literally and then argue with it and debunk it has to have it be linear. But what if your understanding is this is not linear? This is in the beginnings of creation, right? Okay. That's a little more the sense of how our scholars have interpreted the Hebrew. And it's a little more like what we know happened in the universe, right?
But this is the beginning of writing about it.
Right. So this is an early rendering of creation in the ancient Near East. Okay. So who's doing the baraing? Who's doing the creating?
Elohim.
Thank you. Yes, God. Who's doing the creating here? Elohim. Unless, and we're going to read a different commentary on this, unless it's not. So, but Bereshit bara Elohim. So in the beginning of the creating that Elohim, it seems, is doing. And what is involved in some of this creating? Hashemayim v'ha'aretz. The heavens and the earth. Everything. V'ha'aretz. Now you can read this as the conjunctive or the disjunctive of v'ha'aretz, but the land, the earth, or you can say and the earth. I don't think it matters so much at this time. You know, a lot of times I think that vav matters a lot, how you translate it. I don't think it matters as much here. So but or and the aretz, what was the aretz?
The rock.
Tohu vavohu. What is tohu vavohu? Right. So why are we having trouble translating that?
No one was there at the beginning.
Because we don't, I mean, what are you going to say about what was before anything was?
So who created that?
Right. Right. So that's one question. Did someone create that? If there's aretz, but it's tohu vavohu, so there's something maybe, and it's tohu vavohu, and we can't know what that is because it's the primordial ooze. That's how you can translate tohu vavohu, right? So the aretz was primordial ooze. But what do we see next? V'choshech. What's choshech? But darkness, darkness, al panei tehom, is on the face of the tehom. What's tehom? The deep. All right, that's one translation, right? Tehom. V'ruach Elohim, and a spirit, a wind of Elohim, merachefet al panei hamayim, is hovering, this is the word for when a helicopter stays in place or a hummingbird stays in place, they're merachefenim. So it's not static, or the sense is not static or slow. The sense is like a very fast vibration that is still but is moving a lot, right? So the hummingbird is still, but its wings are going 1,000,000 miles an hour, right? Same with the helicopters. It's still, but the blades are going super fast to keep it still. That's the sense of what's happening with Ruach Elohim here. Al Panei Hamayim is on the face, and that's happening on the face of the waters. Okay?
Does deep refer to waters, deep waters?
So very interesting. What is Tehom and what is Mayim? Is Tehom made of Mayim? Or are Tehom and Mayim separate things? So it's got to be one or the other. Either Mayim is part of Tehom, or Tehom is something separate from Mayim. Most interpretations want to say that Tehom is Mayim. Tehom is made of Mayim. Tehom tells us something about the depths, meaning it is so massive. All right. Vayomer Elohim, and Elohim speaks. We take this for granted, okay? But there is no reason to take this for granted. How Elohim creates the least sexy is God says so. That is like the least sexy option, right? Like, what are some other options that are a little sexier? Really?
God sauntered in.
God sauntered in and did what?
Arms wide open.
And flung arms wide, and something happens, right? That is way sexier. God sashaying in right? And making some grand gesture. What's another one? Think of other cultures even.
Waved his magic wand.
God waves God's magic something, staff, wand, right?
Out of the waves.
God comes out of the waves and declare, or whatever, and okay.
Why was the water there?
We're going to go there.
Was it there
Very good,
before?
Bruce.
And maybe that has something to do with where the water came.
Very good. So we're going to go there. So speech is not the first place. God dreamed the world into existence, right? A fire came forth, which we see a lot in Torah, and all of a sudden there's the universe, right? So there could have been a lot of options. Our Torah has God speak and then things manifest. Speech then manifests as what we know as reality. This is a very Jewish concept, going all the way back to our origin story, right? That when we speak, we create reality. Adabra, kedabra, right? All right. Aramaic. Adabra, kedabra. All right.
Yes.
Was there?
Yes.
Of course.
All right. So God speaks, and what does God say? So this is the command form of the verb to be. Yehi. What's the command form of to be? How would you say it? Forget how you know the translation. How would you say the command form of the verb to be? With an exclamation point at the end. Be.
Oh, in English. Yeah.
Exists.
Becometh.
Becometh. Oh, I love that. All right. So that's the sense here. God speaks and says, becometh light, and light became. Right? So exist, light, and light existed. God sees that the light, kitov, is good, and God divides between the light and the choshech. So to Bruce's point, what is already present before God does anything? Choshech, darkness, is there, which seems to suggest something other than an absence of light, right? Without light, obviously there's no light, there's only dark. But it doesn't say that. It says choshech is a thing. Choshech is there. It is present. And we have tehom and we have mayim. Now, if tehom and mayim are the same, tehom is made up of mayim. And somehow tehom is describing the sense of how the mayim is. Like a lot, or everything, or whatever. Okay. So then the question becomes, how did choshech get there? And how did mayim get there? That is one obvious question. Obviously, in a monotheistic tradition, somehow it is still part of God creating, right? I'm sorry? So possibly the Ruach Elohim that we have already creates the choshech and the tehom and the mayim. Yes.
I said that back a little bit, that the speech and coming up with the idea preceding the thing is not sexy. That's the sexiest thing I can think of.
Okay.
You know, and that there's these the darkness and the water are almost like elemental opposites, and speech ideas is what creates other things. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Okay, but speech is not ideas.
Isn't it?
No. Ideas are ideas until they're spoken. Now there's something, now they're an idea outside of you. There's a theory that language came into existence in order for us to articulate to ourselves our ideas, our thoughts.
Unless there be light, understand what that is.
No, I know. I'm not saying there's not an idea first. I'm saying idea is not speech. I have lots of ideas I don't share. Thank God. That's how I keep my job. But
Okay. So
speech and ideas are different.
Okay, so the idea could exist without the enunciation.
Correct. So the fact that the mechanism of creation is speech is not intuitive. God could have had an idea and it manifests. Why does God have to speak? Because the story is written by humans is my answer, right? And that's how we create. That's how ideas get outside of us and can happen. If I say, please, Harvey, hand me that cup, It's an idea I have, but once I speak it, now it can actually happen in the real world.
Kind of blowing my mind, which is why I missed these
That's already there.
that's why I missed
These sessions, right? Okay.
Amy,
Yes.
what if we look at God not so much as creator, as in making something out of nothing, as much as arranger? It's always seemed to me that what God is doing here is arranging an order of things, that there was complete chaos, and God is taking the pieces and making them into this world.
So that works until you get to the word Yehi. Now you got a problem. Exist, meaning it didn't exist.
Well, the combination didn't exist.
Or didn't exist.
Light didn't exist.
I'm just saying that's,
So that-
once you have Yehi, you have a problem with arranging. Because it says exist, right? Which means it didn't exist. All right. So I want to move on. I know. There's so much. I'm so excited. So,
One quick question.
or,
Is this the year 5,780, this first sentence? Is that
85.
right? 85.
so for the rabbis, traditionally, yes.
Okay.
Or we don't know, right? But we don't know, but presumably, yes. All right. So when we're talking about this or, what is this or? What is this light not?
Darkness.
It's not the light of the sun.
Oh, right.
It can't be the light of the sun. Because when is the sun created?
After this.
Afterward.
Day 3, right? So this is not the light of the sun. Now, that our tradition has an instinct, that there is a light before the sun is crazy. Why in the world would our ancestors have a story where light is created first and there's no sun? They knew the light comes from the sun and then some from the moon. They didn't know that whole thing. But moon and sun give the light. That's the only light there is other than the light we make through fire. Stars, right? But what instinct is it? What if it is an instinct? What if it is an instinct about how things happened? All right, Justin, will you roll the first clip, please?
Galaxy remains a mystery. But luckily,
How do we
have
turn
a
it
tool
on?
to help us understand the beginning of all galaxies. Light.
Light is a very powerful tool precisely because it doesn't travel infinitely fast. That means that if it has to come to us from somewhere very far away, it needs some time.
Light travels at 186,000 miles a second, slow on a cosmic scale. It takes just over 8 minutes to reach us from the sun, and more than 4 years from our next nearest star.
When we look at objects that are 1 million or 1 billion light years away, then we're looking at them as they were 1 million or 1 billion years ago.
Light to an astronomer is like fossils to an archaeologist.
By studying ancient light, we can look back towards the origin of our galaxy and ultimately the beginning of the universe itself.
Our sun had not been created, but what was already there? Light, right? Energy that manifests as light, not the light of our sun shining on this planet.
The Big Bang could have been bright too.
Right. So we're, of course, the Big Bang's the brightest, right? Of course. But how cool that possibly, this is an instinct, that there was light before our sun. Because that turns out to be the case. That light that you just saw is older than the light of our sun. And if you watch this whole episode, you will see that we are looking at light from other galaxies now that we have this amazing telescope that's like out there in space, looking at space. We now can see light that is billions of years old because it's billions of light years away. billions of light years old. Our sun is younger than that. So that's the light that's there before our sun. It turns out that's exactly what we have, right? Okay. So we are looking at this primordial ooze, and then we've got some kind of deep something happening here, and then we have, right, the creation of light. Then we have this idea about choshech, this idea about darkness. The other thing is, who knows what's up with those galaxies now? If the light is billions of years old that we're seeing, those galaxies have evolved billions of years more than what we're seeing. Justin, hit the next thing, please.
Andromeda, our nearest large galaxy. We see it as it was 2.5 million years ago. And Hubble has seen further still, imaging what looks like a cosmic rose. 2 colliding galaxies. The larger galaxy, UGC 1810, is about 5 times more massive than its companion. We see them as they were 300 million years ago. But to wind back the clock to the origin of all the galaxies, Hubble needs to look farther into space than it ever has before.
One of the temptations when you're an astronomer is to only look at the obvious things. But that's just a tiny fraction of everything in the universe.
Hubble's most surprising discovery came when it looked away from the light.
What we did is we turned Hubble toward a blank part of the sky, and Hubble stared at it.
Peering into the darkness for 4 months, Hubble reveals the blackest patch of space is not quite so empty.
What we ended up finding was galaxies upon galaxies going back billions and billions of years, much further back in time than we would have guessed.
It glimpses primitive and unusual galaxies, unlike anything in our current universe. They are celestial fossils that light the way to the primordial past, until eventually, right on the limit of what it can see, potentially one of the first galaxies to form in the universe. So distant that when we gaze upon
Justin, will you go to
it, we're seeing
25?
13.4 billion years into the past. This is a time astronomers call the cosmic dark ages. We can't see galaxies and stars because they have not yet been born. It's a period that optical telescopes like Hubble will simply never be able to explore.
When we look into the cosmic dark ages, we don't see light from any stars at all.
Long before our planet existed, before even the first stars, just endless gloom. With no starlight to follow, it may seem as if our quest to find the beginning of the universe has reached its end. But perhaps counterintuitively, the younger starlight we can see offers clues to help us understand the origin of the universe. to a time before the first galaxies. And finally, we can cross the cosmic dark ages to pinpoint the moment the universe began. A moment we know happened 13.8 billion years ago. The Big Bang. The moment when our universe burst into existence. Yet, it wasn't anything like an explosion.
This is the initial state of the universe, which was very hot and very, very dense.
Everything, the whole universe, was held together in a very tiny region of space.
So everywhere in the universe is almost like being inside of a star.
All the matter that has ever been produced came from that moment in time.
When we look back, they go to before that, like what happened, like theories about what happened for there to be a Big Bang. They talk about the dark as like having this, it still had dynamism to it and tiny little fluctuations. And one of those tiny little fluctuations, like kind of mixes with another, right? So it starts with what's called inflation and then the Big Bang. All right. So my point being, there, before the light of the sun, there is light. Before that light, the Big Bang, there is choshech that is dynamic. It's not just the absence of light. The choshech that was before the Big Bang was dynamic. There was stuff going on in there. That is accurate scientifically, right? We know that now, and we're starting to understand more and more. For me, I love watching this and then mapping that onto Genesis 1:1. Because everybody wants to debunk this, and I'm not saying this is true and therefore it's magically blah blah, right? I'm saying, could people 200 years ago, 1,500 years ago, could they have imagined what we just saw on Nova? Could they have imagined that that's how the universe came into existence, right? So the imagination it takes to even think about the origins of everything is already crazy, right? So now, but if we take what actually we think happened and you graft that onto Genesis 1:1, Genesis 1:1 is not so off. That's crazy.
We have trouble imagining it today.
Yeah. Right, yeah. Right? It's hard for us to imagine what's going on.
Isn't that what?
Yes.
Isn't that? I'm thinking about, maybe I'm all too poor and too much restaurant, but isn't that kind of what Judaism is thinking of something beyond, something greater than what's around us? You know what I mean? It's almost like, okay, we've got the sun, we've got the earth. Isn't that kind of what we're trying to do, is place a source, a kind of divine source, even greater than the stuff around us?
Yes.
Doesn't it fit nicely? I think the idea of thinking of a light before a light, isn't that what we're doing spiritually, or am I crazy?
Well, the latter might also be true, but go to what you're saying is, so is the light before the light, is that an allegory for our spiritual journey?
No, or basically, it's not surprising that people who would think of God, the way it's defined in Judaism, would sort of maybe intuitively push that on into creation too, thinking, there's what we have, but there's probably something greater beyond our understanding, so on and so forth. and it's sort of transmuted into this creation story. But it's not such a crazy idea to think that there's more to this. There's a light, to summarize it, that there's a light beyond the light. It's not, it's a jump. It's a huge jump, but we're kind of ready for it.
But what you're saying is that light is a metaphor for something beyond.
Yeah, something ineffable.
Okay.
I mean, like this stuff really freaks me out because we talk about an impersonal God. This is the guy we're supposed to talk to now. The guy who created this, like, oh my God, like I don't even exist with this guy.
Right, and it's in some ways chutzpahdik to imagine we could have a relationship to something that big, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, are you out of your mind?
That is the chutzpah of the Jewish people. That is exactly the chutzpah of the Jewish people. It's why we're here 3,000 years later, because we have the chutzpah to think we could be in a covenantal relationship.
Yeah, with this guy?
With them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, Margot.
I like this format because, like, I think now we have science to show us, like, here's exactly what Rabbi Amy is saying, the framework of creation. So in the space and time we are now in 2024, to be like, oh, well, if there's a spiritual creation of the Jewish spirit which we all belong to in the human bodies that we have, then I like that we can even look at science to be like, yeah, like this is the way that creation occurs. So when you look at all of us as a community or as a people or in our identity, you can see that, like, exactly what Rabbi is saying, this isn't wrong. Like, even science can show you that this is the process of creation. So whether the people of the ancient world were knowing of that without some proof because it was archaic, that was the time. But in today's world, we can go back to science. We can look to the heavens of nature and be like, it ain't wrong. So,
assuming that science at the moment is right, and if you look at the history of science, you will see that it always changes. And 100 years from now, they can say, oh, that was what they thought the Big Bang. I'm not saying this is not true, but
right? Well, there are some things we know. There are some things that we will interpret differently that we see now will be reinterpreted.
Newton's math worked.
But
not on the quantum level.
No, hold on. Newton's math worked, got us to the moon. Mm-hmm. But Einstein's math and relativity painted a different picture that was more accurate. But it doesn't mean you can accept both truths, because it doesn't mean that Newton's vision of the universe was wrong. It wasn't.
Right. So our understanding,
just not
right. So
next guy.
So what Bruce is saying is, what I hear is that our understanding evolves. It doesn't negate, right, some of the principles that we understand as part of our world. We just get more and more knowledgeable beyond what we understand. Harvey?
Yeah, I think it's always fun to try and marry science to theology, and that's fun. And science changes, and our interpretation of theology change. But for me, it works. If you want to consider light as enlightenment, it works just as well. And I don't need to put it together with science to make it work.
Yeah.
And it existed before you knew about it. It existed, and then it came to you in the birth, in the creation of awareness.
It doesn't make it any more real simply because we can marry science to it. It's real in and of itself, right from the book, however I want to interpret it.
100%. I 100% agree. I just was watching that, and I was doing my Rosh Hashanah sermon about the cosmos coming into existence at all and how unlikely that is, and that we're here as sentient beings at all, and the unlikelihood of all that. And then I started studying Bereshit, right? And after watching this, I'm just like, okay. I just wonder if we're not separate from the universe, which we're not, since we know all matter and all energy comes from that, right? Then we're not separate from what happened. So is there a part of us that kind of is connected to what happened because we're of what happened? I don't know. It's a little more mystical than I tend to get. But anyway. All right. So let's look at your Torah study sheet, your source sheet. Let's look at source, the one under the scenes from Nova, Brian Greene, from Until the End of Time. Through language, story explodes. Harvey, this is to your point. Through language, story explodes the limits that would otherwise be imposed by our own narrow experiences. As the masterfully chosen words direct our imagination, we gain a deeper sense of our common humanity and a more nuanced understanding of how to survive as a social species. So Harvey, to your point, that Torah and all story, all myth, all of that is about broadening our horizons past our own narrow lived experience. Without story, without language, all I have is what I've experienced. That's the only thing I can imagine, is what I've experienced. When we start with language, go to everything is created through God speaking, through language, I can enter your world. When you tell me about your knee surgery, I can start to feel in my own knee. I can start to imagine in my own body what you're telling me you feel. It feels like a knife going in the side of my knee. I can imagine that. That is outside my realm of experience. But now I can have an experience that is not one that I actually lived, but it is one that informs and expands my understanding of the world and human experience. And I can begin to empathize because you're telling me how much you hurt on the inside, and it's not physical like the knee. You miss somebody so much that it's physically, you can feel it. That expands exponentially our existence as human beings and what we experience as we put ourselves in someone else's narrative inside of their experience. Now, we're putting ourselves as human beings, telling this around the fire 4, 5, 6,000 years ago, putting ourselves beyond even human experience. Our ancestors were putting themselves out there to try to get some taste of what that experience was before there is even the world that we know. Right, George? Right. So the power of that, just the power of that, trying to put ourselves outside of even the world as we know it, is a hugely audacious, creative, imaginative, wonderful expansion of our consciousness and what we know. All right.
Listening to stories or reading books. Right.
Yes, right? Yes. And this is what the argument from Green is, that this is what props up us being social beings, right? Is that I can share your experience, and that brings us closer than if you're just having your own thoughts and experiences and I'm having mine. And then maybe we do a project together and that's the only time we overlap. I can get inside your experience and you inside mine once we can tell a story. Once we can talk, once we can communicate. But beyond talking, stories, it turns out, help us rehearse for things that haven't happened and gets us familiar with different scenarios. So if they should present themselves in real life, we're ready, right? So story, it turns out, is beyond just the social connector that is amazing, and just beyond me understanding your experience and you mine, or mine, yours, and your mine. It's that we can all imagine over and over and over scenarios that help us rehearse for what we might face. That's crazy. That's so awesome. Okay. So Aviva Zorenberg says, the Jerusalem Talmud, Rashi's going to quote the Jerusalem Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud extends the kinetic, tactile basis of the imagery that we just saw in creation. Rav said, let there be a separation. Let the separation strengthen. Let it crystallize. Let it freeze. Let it consolidate. To be is represented as a sort of gelling process. As the formless, liquid, primary substance finds its limits in space, solidifies, and assumes its proper form. That is exactly what happened, by the way. Right? Energy, right, becomes mass. becomes material, those collide, right, and come together and become planets, right? Then some energy becomes stars. The stars pull the planet into the, right? So this is what happened. There's a separation, right, from the Big Bang. Now things separate. We know the universe is expanding. So it separates and then starts to congeal into what we know as the known universe, into galaxies, planets, stars.
Seems so much more enlightening to accept these stories as myths, which have flexibility in their being, than to look at history of our people and any people as just fact after fact after fact, because that doesn't hold enough strength to it.
All right. Okay, we're going to look at Zenju Ursula Manuel, priestess in the Buddhist tradition, a Zen Buddhist priestess, woman of color. And I say that only because she references it a lot in her book, Opening to Darkness, because she's talking about darkness and she's talking about dark-skinned people and how both have been denigrated. Both the dark and dark skin, as kind of attached to that idea, have been denigrated. And she is, in 2020, felt called to write this beautiful book, Opening to Darkness, about appreciating again the absence of light, as well as the absence of light in one's skin. Also queer. So another way that she's marginalized. It's the 21st century, and it feels like we are returning to the beginning, to the dark origin from which humans emerged. The trouble in the world is asking us to assess and recreate how we live. Along the way, we lost track of the stars and now find ourselves in fear of one another, of living and dying, and of the consequences of the human being's impact on the planet we live on. The greatest question is, what will happen to us next? It is my experience that we come from the inexplainable darkness of birth into a life that is also dark and unknown. The dark road within has been blocked with incomplete or the absence of sacred transmissions for being with darkness. So if we go pre-light, pre all of that to that, whatever's there, I'm sorry, Bruce isn't here, because I was going to say, to the thing about Tehom and the Mayim, our instinct is there that of course that's where birth happens. Of course that's where the universe happens. It emerges out of the dark and the water. We know that because it happened to us. We were born, we gestated in the dark and in the water. So when we are writing about the origins of all things, we already embody the truth of our own experience, which is we begin in dark and in water. Of course, that's how the universe begins, right?
That's the
yes.
Inside the darkness.
Yes. 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 So the tohu vavohu is amniotic fluid, right? And cells, our cells and amniotic fluid with all of its cells, right? Within each of us, darkness is embodied, whether we acknowledge its existence or not. Simply, this is my highlight, simply being born from darkness has anchored an experience of it within us. Perhaps something is always in the dark, waiting to be born, repeatedly in the interest of change and transformation, both personal and collective. The more darkness, the more change.
Amen.
What I want to say is halavai. It should only be. It should only be that this is the truth, right?
Darkness becomes sort of equated with all negative things.
That's exactly what she explores a little bit, is, like that we've twisted our relationship to darkness by so polarizing. I'm using that word on purpose. so polarizing the ideas of light and dark, good and bad. And, that's the Western Greek split that Judaism prides itself in never having bought. And she's trying to bring us back to the wisdom of the dark, that dark means change and transformation, because something's in there waiting to come forward. And the more dark, the more change. Halavai, I pray she's right. Right? But it's a helpful reframe for me, since November 5th is coming. It's a helpful reframe, because for me, I'm going to hang on to it with everything I've got, this book and like these beautiful passages from the book, because I may need it November 6th.
Always a crack in the darkness.
Right? Well, there's always a crack in everything. That's how they like it. All right. Rabbi Arthur Green says, the Targum, when you translate the Torah into another language, renders the opening word of Torah not as Bereshit, but Bechochmata. So God creates in Chochmata, in wisdom, Chochma. God creates through wisdom. Bereshit, in wisdom, bara Elohim. God creates Shemayim va'aretz. Right? This Torah/wisdom is unknown to us. It is Torah before it became garbed in material clothing, say the Kabbalists, which is another, for me, echo of what we just watched from the Hubble telescope. The Holy Zohar then reverses the subject order of the verse. Through wisdom did the hidden source, unknown, mysterious, beyond language, create Elohim. What did the Midrash just do? Right? It flipped, right? Because what's our Hebrew? Our Hebrew is Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, barad, created who? Elohim did. Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Read it differently. Bereshit, through wisdom, or in the beginning, bara, he created Elohim. What does that do? Whoa, okay. Bereshit, in the beginning, he created Elohim. Is Elohim singular or plural?
Plural.
Oh, plural. So in the beginning, the singularity created plurality.
Wow.
That instinct is here as far back as the Targum. As far back as the Targum. The instinct is, but what if? It's not Elohim barad. What if it's Bereshit bara and the whoever's doing it is unmentioned? It's just he, implied in he created. Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, he created Elohim. The hidden, the unknowable, the beyond everything, source, capital S, energy, capital E, accident, capital A, created Elohim. Created multiplicity.
Okay, drop the mic. You're done.
Right? Like, mine's like, that.
It sort of jives with the Hasidic
With the whole, did you see her thing about the Hubble looks, or not the Hubble, it's the new one, Planck. Planck looks into the dark now. They turned away from the light to look at what's in the dark. And it turns out the dark is full of galactic fossils. It's not dark, actually. It is, but it's got these remnants of galaxies from billions of years ago. Wait, what was I going to say about that? Wait, what were you saying? So, I don't know what I was going to say. I lost my train of thought. Okay. So,
the genes.
Huh?
The genes of the eggs in the body of the creation of the birth.
There you go.
Bam.
Right? Boom. Amniotic fluid with all of its stuff in it. Right? So it's not empty. Oh, that's what I was going to say. So when remember that scene where she says it's all right after the Big Bang? Everything's hot and dense. like really dense. She said a teaspoonful of that, would have been like 80,000 tons, right? So like, it's so dense and it's all hot. For the Kabbalists, do you remember the Kabbalistic story of creation? What's the problem? What's the problem that has to be solved for creation to happen in the Kabbalistic explanation of how things get created?
The vessel needs to be broken.
That happens. What's the problem? Right. What's the first thing that God does in the Kabbalistic story? Huh? God has to withdraw God's self. Why?
To make space for the universe.
To make space for the universe. There's no space for the universe to exist.
Right, that's what I'm saying. That's what I was saying, is that this is...
It's all what we just saw. Right? It's all... There's no room for anything to exist. God has to withdraw God's self and leave a pocket for our universe to exist. All right. So let's look back at our commentary. Through wisdom did the hidden source, unknown, mysterious, beyond language, create Elohim. That one brought forth a single God in plural form, the one now appearing with many faces. Elohim. As soon as there was a world, there were multiple pathways to truth. This multi-faced God was the first creation emerging out of mystery. Your God, my God, God as I need to imagine him, her, it today. The God I will need to encounter tomorrow, they are all one. This also means that the Talmudic teaching, both these and those are the words of living Elohim, is an underlying principle of Torah. There is more than one way to attain truth. All right, I want to close with two beautiful pieces that are written post October 7th that speak to what we just studied. One is called Separate Again. Remember that at the end of creation, at the end of the whole business, is the seventh day, right? Where the creation happens through separation, as Bert mentioned earlier, and God creates Shabbat on the seventh day and sanctifies it. Separate again. Even though heaven and earth and all their array seemed finished at a quiet moment, the chaos at creation, tohu vabohu, snuck back in, armed with dread. So God, we beg you, return to us, because the work is not done. There can be no rest, not for you, not for us. Come back. Separate again the dream from the nightmare, the light from the darkness, the sacred from the profane, so it can be good again. And then, when the work is done and the land is quiet and we can finally exhale, then you can bless the seventh day and declare it holy once more.
Amen.
Can you send that?
Can
you send that?
Mm-hmm. And then a poem called Darkness Over the Surface of the Abyss by Tzur Guetta, translated by Michael Bohan and Heather Silverman and Rachel Korazim. My teacher Michal once asked us, who can tell me the meaning of the verse, the earth was chaos and confusion with darkness over the surface of the abyss? All these years, since then to this very day, that question has echoed within me. The teacher's eyes, as she was looking for a raised hand, echoed in me. That all-encompassing silence echoed in me. On October 7th, the ringing telephone echoed in the silent home of my teacher, Michal. It's me, I said. Here's your chaos and confusion. Here's your darkness. Here's your abyss. Goodbye. The incredible poetry that's come out of, right, this horrible time. But I feel like this is what is partly what makes this poetry unique, is the way it rests on the Torah text in a way that it only can through Hebrew poetry, right? That there's a tohu vavohu understanding that is beyond reading an English text, right? And it's just so important that we continue to appreciate the ways that our Torah anchors this poetry and how this poetry fleshes out meanings of Torah based on the Jewish people's experience. So I'm going to keep bringing to you what I feel like are poems that are coming out now of our people's experience, but also out of the text that we share that only we really appreciate who study it.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday Morning Torah Study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.